When a historian begins their primary source analysis, there are many different layers or resolutions that they can approach the text at. They can look at it from a quantitative sense or a qualitative sense. They can look at it for particular types of information or for a general sense of the message being conveyed. And in fact, one of the most common methodologies is something known as close reading. Now, close reading has technical definitions depending on which discipline or field you are working within. But for here, I'm going to use the most general definition I can think of. A close reading is reading the document closely. Now, before anyone objects too much to that, let me explain a bit more what I mean. A close reading is when you go through a document carefully, thoughtfully, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, argument by argument, looking at the entire document for both its text and its context. I'm not speaking about looking at only the text in isolation. What do the words mean and nothing else? We are looking specifically at how the message is being constructed and what that message means within a wider environment of data. So there are different ways you can approach a close reading. You can read it in a naturalistic or humanistic way, where you read it in the same general manner that an audience member from the contemporary period would engage with that text. Try to absorb the meaning and the intentions of its creator. And that's a really good place to start. But what I want to provide for you today is a methodology for looking at the text in a slightly more systematic and fine-grained way. What do I mean by that? Well, instead of looking at the document as a whole, instead of looking at it for its overall narrative or argumentative structure, or even individual paragraphs or points, I'm going to take you through a document line by line, sentence by sentence, and specifically clause by clause. Now, why would we do this? Well, it provides us a different way of looking at the document. We as human beings can often read through a document and get the general message, the general sentiment, the general argument, and that's great. That's usually what the author is intending us to receive. But it can be helpful to look at things in a more isolatable and systematic way because it helps us get that little bit of extra insight. That insight might be rhetorical tricks or rhetorical effects that the author was using to help convey or be persuasive in their message. It can also help us isolate particular biases in the thinking of the author, or particular environments or cultural assumptions in the way they're constructing their text. Things that are small, little, but add up over the large scale. So if you come away from a document with a certain feeling, a certain intuition, it can be helpful to go through it step by step to see the ingredients of what perhaps made you have that impression. And this is really good if you are doing this as part of an essay or an assignment, because instead of saying that the document says this and it's my general feeling, you can point to very specific evidence about how that emotion or that meaning was conveyed. Now, I don't want to overstate this method. This is only one in several layers of primary source analysis. And you don't want to overanalyze things. You don't want to think that this will tell us the scientific truth of the document. It's simply a tool, another way, another perspective on a document or primary source. So the first thing we have to do is we have to make sure we understand our terms. This is going to be primarily looking at syntax. Now, syntax is the order or the construction of the sentences. And in English language documents, such as this one, there is a basic grammatical syntax that we expect most sentences to follow. Now, if you've not studied grammar in a long time, you may only know about this syntax informally. Something sounds right to you, or something sounds a bit fishy if it doesn't follow the syntax properly. So we're going to do a crash course now in English grammar for the extent that we need it to understand this methodology. English language grammar is quite complex, and there are no absolute rules in how a sentence must be constructed. However, there are general expectations. So we're going to take this very basic sentence. Odysseus threw the spear at Hector. Now, Odysseus threw the spear at Hector has all the basic components that you need to understand this methodology. The first is that a sentence has 4 main parts: the subject, the verb, the indirect object, and the direct object. Now, the subject of the sentence is the person or the thing that is acting out the verb. It doesn't really matter what kind of verb it is, whether it is an active verb like threw or a passive verb like was thrown. It doesn't matter if it's transitive, such as kicked or punched or gave, or if it was intransitive, such as spoke or ran. It doesn't even matter if it is an action verb and something the person is doing, or a relational verb, which I mean, generally speaking, to be, or is, are, that sort of word. All of these verbs, all of these ways of acting or behaving, thinking or speaking, are undertaken by the subject of the sentence, Odysseus. The second half of the sentence is called the predicate, and the predicate has the other 3 parts. Now, the verb is probably the most important. And again, you'll need to identify what type of verb it is later, but for the moment, we just need to know that there is a verb in any clause. And then we have the direct object and the indirect object. Now, these can be accidentally confused, but it really is as simple as these 2 different things: what is being acted upon directly and what is being acted upon indirectly by that verb, by that subject. So if we think about Odysseus threw the spear at Hector, what is he actually throwing? The spear or Hector? Well, he's throwing the spear. So the spear is the direct object. The verb is directly affecting that object. Now the spear is going to come hurtling through the air at Hector. So he is indirectly affected by the throwing of the spear. So he is the indirect object. And it's really as simple as that. Odysseus threw the spear at Hector. Subject, verb, direct object, indirect object. Now, what does this have to do with English language syntax? Well, generally speaking, we expect a sentence to follow this basic pattern: subject, verb, direct object. Now, the indirect object usually appears somewhere in the predicate. It could be before the direct object or after the direct object, but it's usually after the verb and certainly after the subject. The subject usually comes first and the verb is somewhere in the middle. So think about it this way. If I say Odysseus threw the spear at Hector, that sounds right. If I say Odysseus threw at Hector the spear, it sounds a little bit weird. You wouldn't expect me to say it in that order. If I say the spear Odysseus threw at Hector, you understand what that sentence means, but it sounds a bit odd, doesn't it? The spear doesn't usually come first. The direct object doesn't usually come first. And if I say at Hector the spear Odysseus threw, it sounds maybe poetic, but certainly not normal English syntax. Now again, English is a very flexible language. We can order these most ways that we want to, not every way we want to, but in most ways with poetic license. But if we do not go subject, predicate, verb, objects, people will notice, at least subconsciously, and that allows for something called effect. So if I say the spear Odysseus threw at Hector, that is putting the spear at the start of the sentence. It's noticeably there. We pay attention to it. The spear is the important part of that sentence, rather than Odysseus or even poor Hector. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please consider hitting the like button below or subscribing to the channel. That'll let me know this is the type of video you want to see more of. And if you have any questions, comments, or just a suggestion for an upcoming video, please leave a comment below.